A New Hope, Nier Chapter 61. You can read all of Azazyel's fan fiction stories by subscribing to patreon.com/Azazyel. The next few days were a series of grueling prep work. Its essence was to teach us prospective huntsmen the layout of the school. More importantly, I realized all the lessons we had the first few days were to see where we were in terms of combat skill, intelligence, our capability with our team, and most importantly whether we were a sadistic future problem in the making. I know that was the case, as Carden Winchester and his team were literally encased in shattered stone and being levitated by Goodwitch outside of Beacon one afternoon, as apparently they attempted to corner one of the upper years Faunus students. That wasn't a pushover like Velvet was. To say it went poorly was an understatement, as the upper year Faunus gleefully broke their auras in a dance of violence that only with Professor Goodwitch arriving stopped said student from potentially crippling them. So now they were blacklisted from Beacon and probably banned from being a huntsman in general. But the main problem was the fact that my team had a deadweight and a half that was keeping us from being assigned missions out into the Emerald Forest and the immediate area outside of Vale's walls. Jean and Ruby had a number of issues, such as Jean being completely inept in her combat skills and Ruby missing 2 years of training and schooling. That was more of a paperwork issue, as I technically had zero education in remnant systems but with my combat skills and general intelligence. The teachers considered me a prodigy and left me to absorb all the little nuisances of being a huntsman. Ruby, I am going to need you to get some tutoring from your sister about the 2 years of stuff you skipped when you joined Beacon early, I said as I sat Ruby and Jean in front of me with the other 2 girls arrayed around the room listening to me, as I had said previously that I needed to discuss something important for the team. Jean, I see you are actually taking the combat lessons seriously, but it's plain to all that you come from a civilian background and are thus severely behind the people who have been training for literally a decade already, so we are going to need to do a high-intensity training program to get you ready, possibly kill Grim on your own, I said gently to Jean, as I didn't want to discourage her. Even with us being 3 days into Beacon, she was spending at least 3 hours a day doing general exercises, but that wouldn't amount to much as combat was far different from lifting weights. Pyrrha, you use a sword and shield even if it's not completely your focus, so you teach her the basics of that. I will teach you the art of evasion and most importantly stamina, I said, and raised my hand with an almost white-hot fireball appearing on it that even with my own resistance to my magic made my eyes burn at how the heat was drying out my eyes. Pyrrha nodded to my request to teach Jean, while Ruby was obviously pouting about needing to do even more schoolwork. Ruby, once we start getting missions done you will get money for said completed missions and will be able to buy all the snacks and gun parts that you want. That seemed to light a fire in the little Reaper, and now there was just one little issue, which was Jean mumbling about how she didn't want to take up our team's time having to train her. Jean, you came here as a deadweight, I said, simply, making her blank out, and even the other girls looked in surprise at how blunt I was being. There is nothing inherently wrong with that normally, but in this line of work being weak is a mortal sin. What would have happened if me and Nora didn't approach you and noticed you didn't even have aura? Left unsaid was how she would have ended up being one of those people who died in the initiation, probably splattered on some tree, unless Pyrrha decided to save her, which funny enough she didn't in this timeline. She ended up running into her as Jean was climbing into a tree she collided with and ended up entangled in its branches. Now we need you up to reasonable combat skill level in order for our own goals to be met. If you dislike the feeling of being deadweight, then work harder, I said simply before standing up to stretch. Speaking of combat, Pyrrha, would you care to go around? The random people Goodwitch put me against wasn't anything much, I said lightly, as the one time I got randomly selected by the combat teacher I got slotted to fight some idiot who relied entirely on his semblance that could make a deep mist around him to land sneak attacks on his opponents. I just had to blow away the mist and then bash him a couple of times over the head with the back of Virtuous Contract in order to bring his aura down to low levels, ending our fight. Pyrrha hummed in thought as she considered my offer, but smiling with an edge of competitiveness as she nodded. Very well, Captain, I have been looking forward to testing your abilities and figuring out what in the world your semblance is anyway.